Good afternoon, 6th grade history class. Happy Thursday. It is April the 2nd. So glad that you could join me. We're on page 259, section 14.4 today. We're going to be looking at several battles and people that help us advance our cause for freedom. There are several incidents that will happen in today's lesson where we helped other countries get free or where we defended freedom in our own country. So let's look at the beginning. We'll start off with Operation Desert Storm. The American people overwhelmingly elected Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, to the presidency in 1988. President Bush promised to continue the job that Ronald Reagan had begun. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, invaded the tiny oil-rich kingdom of Kuwait. Other Arab nations worried that they would be the next victims of Hussein's aggression. In addition, Israeli secret agents revealed that Saddam Hussein was very close to developing an atomic bomb. President Bush convinced the United Nations to send troops to liberate Kuwait and protect the other Arab nations. As in past actions of the United Nations, the United States provided most of the military muscle. By early 1991, 500,000 American troops were stationed in the Arabian Desert. Once President Bush had obtained the support of Congress, Operation Desert Storm, later called the Persian Gulf War, began. New technology enabled the Air Force to select and destroy military targets with little harm to the civilian population of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was unprepared to fight a high-tech war on such a large scale. The American military was more powerful than the Iraqi military because President Bush was now using the weapons that President Reagan had developed and stockpiled or stored for future use. President Bush also insisted that the war in the Persian Gulf be directed by military men rather than by politicians. He realized that soldiers, not politicians, knew how to fight and win a war. Bush placed General Colin Powell in command of Operation Desert Storm. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Powell was second in military command only to the president. General Powell, the son of hard-working Jamaican immigrants, grew up in New York City's South Bronx and served in Vietnam, where he was wounded in action and received a Purple Heart. He now became the spokesman for the military. Because Powell had to remain in Washington, D.C., General Norman Schwarzkopf was appointed to lead the troops into combat. General Schwarzkopf inspired great devotion and bravery in his men. For the first time since World War II, the U.S. Congress followed the wise counsel of a military commander. Remember, up until this point, Congress was telling the generals who knew how to fight. But now, once again, Congress is like, hey, you guys are military trained. You lead the war. On February 24th, 1991, American, British, and French ground troops, assisted primarily by the Saudi Arabians and Egyptians, invaded Iraq with armored tanks. The army of Iraq crumbled before General Schwarzkopf's brilliant military strategy, and thousands of Iraqi troops fled or threw down their weapons in mass surrender. Within a few days, Kuwait had been liberated, and Saddam Hussein had retreated to a bunker in Baghdad. Operation Desert Storm was a great triumph for the American military and the cause of freedom. The war lasted only 2.5 months, from January 16th to April 6, 1991, making it the shortest war our nation has ever fought. However, it only proved to be the beginning of a long struggle against the tyrant Saddam Hussein. Before his defeat in the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein appealed to the Soviet Union for help, but the Soviet Union was in no position to help Iraq. Much of Eastern Europe, remember, at this time, had now declared its independence from Moscow and thrown off the yoke of communism. That perestroika we talked about in yesterday's lesson. These countries, now that they got a taste of democracy, they didn't want the Soviet Union anymore. They were throwing the communists out as quickly as they could. The Soviet republics in Asia also began to assert their right to independence from the Soviet Union. Fearful of losing its grip on the Russian people, the Communist Party attempted a military coup or an overthrow of an established government against Mikhail Gorbachev. This revolt was quickly put down by the forces of Boris Yeltsin, president of the Russian Republic. Yeltsin, who had resigned from the Communist Party only weeks before, now found himself the most powerful man in the country. He declared that Russia was no longer a part of the Soviet Union. By December 1991, Gorbachev resigned and the Soviet Union collapsed as a nation. Most of the former Soviet republics agreed to join together in a loose organization called the Commonwealth of Independent States, but they were still all independent countries, no longer controlled by one central group. Although the collapse of the Soviet Union was a victory for freedom, communism was not dead. Communists still controlled China, North Korea, and Cuba, and remained active in troubled Eastern Europe and throughout the world. Realizing that the time to spread the gospel might be short, Christians in the United States and Europe rushed to get God's word to the people of the former Soviet Union and to help the local Christians who had been persecuted for so long to reach more people for Christ. And that ends today's lesson, the fall of communism. And as we know today, communism is weakened, but it's not dead. We still have it in China, Vietnam, North Korea, and Russia. But we're going to close out today's lesson. Make sure you do the comprehension check on page 261, 14D. Make sure you do all the odd ones. So 1, 3, and 5. All right, guys, so we're about to close out this week. I hope you have a good Thursday. Please make sure you are keeping up with your work, because if you get behind a couple of days, I know it piles up. Remember, this is for a grade. Hopefully see you guys soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.